The dog interrupts the funeral by starting to bark at the casket when a man questions the reason. The priest becomes nervous, and then this man discovers a shocking secret. It was a cloudy day and the sky seemed as sorrowful as everyone present at Hannah's funeral who were in complete silence. Some people held handkerchiefs, while others with tear-filled eyes remembered every happy moment shared. With her the wind blew softly, rustling the leaves of the trees as if nature itself was paying its final tribute. Suddenly an unexpected sound broke the silence. It was Duke, Hannah's loyal dog. He started barking incessantly. He wasn't just any dog, he had always been Hannah's inseparable companion, and now there in front of everyone Duke fixed his gaze on the casket, his barking growing louder and more insistent. People looked at each other, surprised and uneasy. What is he seeing? They whispered. Some seemed disturbed, pacing back and forth but unable to look away. Duke's barking only grew, as if he were trying to warn about something. Duke was a smart dog, and everyone in the village knew it. His fame went beyond the affection he inspired. He seemed to have a sensitivity that surpassed human understanding. Some children seeing him there began to feel a chill down their spines, remembering all those scary stories they had heard about dogs that could sense things we humans couldn't. What was Duke trying to communicate? It was clear that he knew something that unsettled even the adults, but no one dared to ask aloud. With his eyes fixed on a specific point, his behavior suggested something was wrong in that place at that moment. Some adults began to approach Duke, trying to calm him down. However, he kept barking non-stop, his gaze locked directly on the casket. There was something in his posture, an almost palpable determination that even made the most skeptical hesitate. Curiosity filled the atmosphere, and soon everyone wanted to understand what he was trying to say. Father Michael, standing in the front, close to the casket, noticed that all eyes were now on him and the dog. Duke tried to contain his agitation, took a deep breath and gestured for people to settle down again, but the barking didn't stop. With a faint and uncomfortable attempt at a smile, the priest realized that something strange was unfolding, and Duke's gaze seemed to insist that no one ignore what was happening. The priest decided to approach Duke using a gentle voice. He tried to talk to the dog, saying, "Come on, Duke, calm down. Everything is fine here." But even so, Duke continued to bark as if he were trying to warn of something terrible that no one could see. Cautiously, the priest extended his hand to stroke the dog's head, but Duke pulled back, letting out a low growl without taking his eyes off the casket. The priest began to sweat, wiping his forehead as he looked around, aware that everyone in the church was watching his every move. "It's just a dog," he said with a nervous laugh, trying to get people to focus back on the ceremony. But deep down, even he seemed uncomfortable, almost as if he sensed that something bigger was at play, something Duke insisted on revealing. Some people noticed that the priest avoided looking directly at the casket, as if he didn't want to see what Duke seemed to be seeing. "Does he know something?" whispered an elderly woman to her friend beside her. With a suspicious look, others began to feel a strange chill, as if something invisible and inexplicable was present. The children, intrigued and a bit scared, moved closer to their parents, gripping their hands tightly. Father Michael, realizing that the unease was only growing, raised his voice firmly and requested, "Please, someone take the dog outside." But Duke refused to leave. He stayed there, relentless, barking and staring at the casket as if he had an urgent message to convey, and the mystery, instead of dissipating, only grew among those at the funeral. Amidst it all there was a man no one knew well, someone who seemed out of place yet perfectly positioned to witness what was about to unfold. His name was David, a stranger who had recently arrived in the village, but who for some reason held a special affection for Hannah even without Knowing her deeply, David had an observant nature and a restless curiosity. Solving mysteries had always been his passion, and noticing Duke's unusual behavior, he immediately felt that something was very wrong. He looked at Duke and then at the casket, realizing that the dog wasn't barking for no reason. He stood up, slowly adjusted his coat, and walked toward the dog. All eyes turned to him, curious, wondering what this mysterious man, whom they barely knew, would do. "Hello, little friend," murmured David, crouching beside Duke. "What are you trying to show us?" Hearing David's calm voice, Duke stopped barking for a moment, as if assessing the man in front of him. His eyes shone, filled with intelligence and a mix of fear and hope, as if he were pleading for help. David noticed the intensity of that gaze and then turned his attention in the same direction as the dog, fixing his eyes on the casket. A chill ran down his spine, as if something was pushing him to uncover what was really happening there. The people in the church began to whisper, confused and intrigued. "Leave the dog alone," said one of the men, attempting to interrupt the moment, but David just shook his head, replying, "I think Duke is trying to tell us something." He continued to stare intently at the casket and added, "And maybe we should listen." Without further hesitation, David moved even closer to Duke and said in a low tone, "Come on, boy, show me what's bothering you." Duke wagged his tail slightly, as if he understood that David was there to help him. He then stopped barking and began to sniff the ground, taking cautious steps toward the casket, almost as if he were guiding David to a secret only he knew. As David and Duke approached the casket, the neighbors began murmuring among themselves about the legendary sixth sense of animals, recalling stories of dogs and cats that supposedly sensed presences, dangers, or even supernatural events before any human noticed. Duke's unsettling behavior left everyone on edge, and David suggested that perhaps the dog was perceiving something invisible to human eyes. The atmosphere grew heavier, and people wondered in silence, could Duke be seeing something supernatural, or was there an even deeper mystery surrounding Hannah's death? Father Michael, clearly uncomfortable, began to realize that the situation was slipping out of control. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cassock, and cast a serious look around. With firm steps, he walked to the center of the church and raised his hands, asking for silence. "Please, everyone, calm down," he said with a voice that sought firmness, but trembled slightly, revealing his nervousness. "We are here to pay our final respects to Hannah, someone so dear to all of us." The priest gave a penetrating look at David, who was still beside Duke, trying to decipher what the dog wanted to show. "It is inappropriate," continued the priest, now in a louder tone, "for anyone to come here and cause a commotion at such a delicate moment." Some people in the church nodded, but others looked at the priest with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Why did he seem so nervous? Why was he so eager to end this situation? Then the priest pointed directly at David. "What you are doing is a disrespect to Hannah," he declared in a louder and harsher tone. "Leave that dog alone and stop distracting everyone with these foolishness." David, feeling the weight of the priest's words, remained steadfast. Something about the priest's insistent manner that exaggerated urgency to calm the situation only heightened David's suspicions. Beside him, Duke let out a low growl, as if he too disliked the priest's tone. Realizing he was losing control, the priest insisted, almost pleading, "Please, everyone, do not allow Hannah's memory to be tarnished by this behavior. Let us return to our original purpose, to pray for her soul and her eternal peace." But for many, their peace seemed farther away with each passing moment. The priest's words sounded filled with concern, but for those observing closely, the sweat on his forehead and the slight tremor in his hands told a different story. A heavy silence settled over the place, and everyone waited anxiously to see what David's next move would be. Before we continue, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you love and heartfelt stories sensing the priest's discomfort and his desperate attempt to end the conversation as quickly as possible. David decided to ask the question everyone feared to hear with a firm voice and his gaze fixed on the priest. He asked Father Michael how exactly did Hannah die. The church went into an uproar. The murmurs grew and some people exchanged glances surprised at David's boldness. Father Michael's eyes widened. Visibly shaken, he had already told everyone that Hannah had passed away, peacefully sleeping in her bed, but in that moment David's question echoed through the church like a stone cast into a serene lake, creating ripples of uncertainty. What do you mean? How did she die? The priest replied now in a clearly defensive tone. I found her myself in her bed. She passed in peace sleeping. She died in her sleep, he repeated, almost as if trying to convince himself. David, undeterred, took a step forward and continued, but why was Hannah alone, and why were you the first to find her? Doesn't that seem a bit strange to you? The murmur among the people grew louder. A mix of curiosity and unease spread throughout the church. The children, wide-eyed, watched without fully understanding what was happening, while some adults whispered among themselves, making the atmosphere even more tense. Father Michael's face turned red and an expression of anger, barely concealed, took over his features. He stamped his foot firmly, making everyone fall silent once more. This is absurd, he exclaimed, his voice almost a shout. You are causing an uproar during a sacred moment, disrespecting the memory of such a beloved woman. Pointing at David with a trembling finger, he commanded, leave here immediately, you and that dog. His voice held authority, but there was a perceptible nervousness in every word. We will not tolerate another word from you in this place. David hesitated for a moment, but then beside him Duke let out a strong bark, almost as if he were challenging the priest and giving David the push he needed to continue. As if in response to the dismissal, David realized he had touched on something important, something the priest clearly didn't want anyone to uncover. Still, he knew that in that moment he had no other choice. He slowly turned, took hold of Duke's collar, and with one last defiant look at the priest, began to walk toward the door. As the murmurs among those present grew louder, everyone perplexed by what had just happened outside the church, David felt the weight of the curious and suspicious glances of the community behind him, but he couldn't simply leave it all behind. There was something deep and dark in the mystery surrounding Hannah's death, and a strong premonition drove him to press forward. Duke seemed to share this feeling, wagging his tail with enthusiasm, as if he were ready for whatever lay ahead. Come on, buddy, David whispered to the dog. I think we have a lot to uncover here. And with that, they began their investigation through the cemetery, walking among the trees and old gravestones. The cold wind blew, making the leaves dance and producing a sound that resembled whispers in the unsettling silence. David looked around, increasingly certain that this place hid something mysterious. Duke sniffed the ground restlessly, as if searching for something specific. Guided by an almost supernatural intuition, he seemed to know exactly where to go, determined to follow the clues. David concluded that the first step was to learn more about Hannah's life. He made his way to her house, a small stone building on the edge of the forest, surrounded by a garden that seemed forgotten by time. When he arrived, he found the door unlocked, as if someone had left in a hurry, leaving behind more questions than answers. Upon entering the house, David felt a chill run down his spine. The place was covered in dust, but noticed that some objects seemed to have been moved recently. With Duke sniffing beside him, David began to explore every corner, opening drawers, rummaging through papers and documents. It was then that he found a small wooden box on an old table. Inside it there were letters and photographs, all yellowed with age. As he read the letters, he realized that Hannah had kept many secrets. The texts mentioned secret meetings and conversations she had with people from outside the village, but it was when he found one specific letter that his heart raced. Handwritten by Hannah, the letter mentioned Father Michael, revealing that she had discovered very serious things about him. David exchanged a glance with Duke, who seemed restless, as if sensing they were getting close to something important. Continuing his search, David found a small key taped to the back of one of the frames on the wall. What do this key open? He murmured to himself. Duke let out a short bark, as if encouraging David to keep going. Next to the key there was a photograph in it. Hannah stood beside Father Michael, with the church in the background. What caught David's attention most, however, was a detail at the bottom of the image. A small metal box identical to the one Hannah had described in her letters, mentioning that the priest hid money. "We're on the right track," Duke, David said, petting the dog. "If Hannah was trying to tell us something about the priest, maybe this key is the answer we need." David felt a wave of determination with the small key in hand, and Duke by his side. He knew the truth was closer than ever now. He needed to discover what the priest was hiding, and for that he would have to search every corner of the village. "And what about you? Do you think David is doing the right thing? If you were in his place, what would you do?" Leave your comment with your opinion, and don't miss the end of this story, which promises to surprise. With the key in hand, David felt closer than ever to unraveling the mystery. Together with Duke, he decided to return to the village center, where they could continue their investigation. The town seemed calm, but David sensed that something dark was hidden behind that tranquility. He needed to understand the secrets Hannah had kept and what exactly she knew about Father Michael. With this in mind, David went to the town library, an old place filled with shelves of dusty books and ancient documents. He began to search for anything that might link Hannah and Father Michael to something out of the ordinary. After some time searching, he found an old photo album of the town. Flipping through the pages, David saw photos of community events, religious festivals, and finally a series of photos of Hannah. One of them immediately caught his attention. It was an image of Hannah beside Father Michael, but what stood out most was the expression on her face, a look of unease, almost as if she knew something that deeply frightened her. What had Hannah discovered? She didn't look happy, she looked worried. That's when David noticed a detail that almost went unnoticed on the edges of the photo. A small metal box, the same one he'd seen in the photograph found at Hannah's house. Driven by curiosity, David returned to her house, determined to follow the clues to the end. Back at the house, he continued his search for more evidence, and behind an old curtain he found a hidden cabinet. Inside he discovered a notebook, Hannah's diary. The pages were filled with notes that seemed incredibly important. David began to read quickly, with Duke by his side, as if the dog could also feel the tension building in the air. The notes revealed something dark. Hannah had uncovered a network of corruption within the church itself. She mentioned that Father Michael was embezzling money from the congregation for a sinister purpose, secretly accumulating large amounts. David read each line with a racing heart, absorbing every word. He's stealing from everyone and using people's trust to cover up his crimes. Hannah had written on one of the pages. Among the pages of the diary, David found an envelope with more photographs. In some of them, Father Michael appeared in secret locations within the church, carrying the same small metal box. In one of the photos, he stood beside an old statue inside the church, with the box next to him in a position that suggested he was hiding something beneath the sacred figure. A chill ran down David's spine. "So that's it," he murmured to Duke. Almost to himself, she discovered everything, and that's why she was in danger now. David knew he needed to find that metal box in the church. It likely held the key to understanding the entire mystery. He looked at Duke, who wagged his tail as if he were ready for the next step, as if he knew that something big was about to be revealed. Come on, boy, we have a big secret to uncover, David said. With renewed resolve, the situation was more serious than he could have imagined. With all these findings, the truth about what was really happening in that small village seemed about to surface. Holding Hannah's diary in his hands, David felt the weight of each word, each revelation, as if he were carrying a burden that could only be lifted by discovering the truth. He knew he needed to return to the church, the place where all these secrets seemed to intertwine. With Duke by his side, David walked through the narrow village streets, each step intensifying his adrenaline and determination. He was determined to find the metal box mentioned in Hannah's notes. The key to everything was there, waiting to be uncovered. Upon reaching the church, David looked around to make sure no one was following him. The place was steeped in silence, with the doors slightly ajar and the interior cloaked in shadows. He entered cautiously, accompanied by Duke, and began to explore. He remembered the photo he'd seen. The metal box was hidden beneath one of the old statues. Walking slowly, David approached a statue of a saint positioned in an isolated corner of the church. The stone figure seemed to observe everyone with a serious, almost stern gaze, as if guarding something important. David knelt and with trembling hands began to feel around the statue's base, searching for any sign of a hiding place, and then he felt it. There was something there. David moved aside a small piece of fabric covering the statue's base, hidden in the shadows, and there it was, the metal box Hannah had mentioned in her diary. His heart raced, and he exchanged a look with Duke, who wagged his tail as if to say, we're on the right track. David held the box in his hands, feeling its cold, heavy surface. Carefully, he opened the lid, and what he saw inside made him catch his breath. They were bundles of money, all rolled up and tied, with labels indicating donations and tithes from the congregation. But that wasn't all. Beneath the money there was a small key. He picked it up, examining it in the soft light filtering through the church windows. A key, David murmured thoughtfully, but what does it open? That's when he noticed a yellowed piece of paper folded and hidden beneath the money. Carefully, he removed it and unfolded it. It was a map, and in the center a location was marked with a red circle. Beside the circle were the words, church storage. David understood immediately. The key must open some secret storage in the church. This is where Hannah must have discovered something, he thought, with a mix of fear and hope. He knew he had to act quickly. With the key held firmly in his hand, he looked at Duke and said, let's go, boy, we need to find that storage. They stood up and together began to search every corner of the church, determined to uncover the mystery that had been hidden for so long. Following the map carefully, David felt the church grow ever more silent, as if the very building were holding its breath. With the key and map firmly in his hands, he and Duke made their way to the spot indicated on the paper. The map led them to a small door hidden behind the altar, a door that few people even knew existed. A chill ran through David as he approached. The air felt colder there, laden with a dark presence, as if something sinister were kept in that place. He inserted the key into the lock, took a deep breath, and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into a dark basement. With a flashlight flickering in his hand, David began to descend the steps, and Duke followed closely, his ears attuned to any strange sounds. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a damp, shadowy corridor. At the end of the corridor, a faint light flickered, casting uneven shadows on the stone walls. Then David heard a sound, the clink of chains moving. Hannah, he called in a whisper, but all he heard was the echo of his own voice, reverberating in the emptiness. As he entered the room, lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, he saw her Hannah chained to a chair, pale but alive. Hannah, David exclaimed, relieved. And she, in a weak voice, replied with a sigh of relief. David, but before he could reach her, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. Turning, he found Father Michael holding a wooden plank firmly, his eyes blazing with fury. "You shouldn't be here," the priest shouted, his voice distorted by rage. "I told you. You would never find Hannah." David barely had time to react before the priest lunged at him, trying to strike him with the plank. He managed to dodge, but the blow grazed him, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the floor. Trying to defend himself, he raised his hands, his mind racing with one question: how could a priest do something like this? It was inconceivable. David had never imagined that Father Michael, someone who was supposed to embody peace and goodness, could be so violent. Seeing him on the ground, the priest prepared to strike again, but Duke, without hesitation, let out a fierce bark and lunged at the priest, sinking his teeth into his leg. With all his might, the priest's scream of pain echoed through the basement walls. He tried to shake Duke off, but the dog wouldn't let go. Determined to protect his friend in desperation, the priest dropped the plank and began to try to escape, limping and calling for help. David quickly got to his feet, his heart pounding, and ran after him. He can't get away, he thought, knowing the truth needed to come to light. With Duke still on Father Michael's heels, they reached the street where the noise of the commotion was already drawing residents out of their homes. People watched, shocked, seeing Father Michael, a man who was supposed to be respected and honored, involved in a desperate struggle with David, while Duke kept him under control, taking advantage of the moment. David raised his voice and shouted, "Stop. Everyone needs to hear what really happened. Everyone needs to know the truth." With the priest struggling to break free, David quickly explained what he had covered the box with the stolen money, Hannah's kidnapping, and Father Michael's hidden crimes. Shock spread across the faces of the villagers, who could barely believe what they were hearing. Desperate, Father Michael tried to run, but Duke held him firmly in place until some village men approached to help restrain him. With the priest finally contained, David knew it was time to present the evidence. He led the group back to the church and with still trembling hands opened the metal box before everyone. The villagers' eyes widened at the sight of the embezzled money and the map to the secret storage where the priest hid his illicit activity. There were no doubts left. The truth had at last been revealed. David then led everyone to the storage room where Hannah, still frightened, awaited her release. The relief on her face was evident, and Duke, sensing his mission was complete, wagged his tail happily. With Father Michael immobilized and the evidence of his crimes in plain view, it seemed that the mystery had finally been solved. The entire village was in shock, stunned by the revelations, but David knew that Father Michael was not someone who would surrender easily. As the villagers discussed what to do next, the priest, in an act of desperation, seized a moment of distraction and with an expression of deep hatred managed to break free from those holding him. In a swift and desperate move, Father Michael grabbed a piece of wood from the ground and ran toward David. His eyes burned with fury, and he shouted with a voice full of resentment, "You understand nothing. You never should have gotten involved." David was caught off guard, watching the priest advance with the wooden plank raised, ready to strike. For a moment he was paralyzed, his mind struggling to process the surreal scene of a priest acting with such violence. But before the blow could land, Duke sprang into action with a powerful leap. The dog bit Father Michael's leg, tearing a scream of pain from him that echoed down the street. The priest fell to the ground, thrashing to free himself from the dog, while David, recovering from the initial shock, ran to help. He tried to pull the priest away from Duke, and the two ended up rolling on the ground in an intense struggle, with shouts and barks filling the air. Desperate, Father Michael managed to break free from Duke for a brief moment, and began to run limping toward the village's main square, but Duke didn't give up. Determined, he chased after the priest, barking loudly, and quickly caught up with him in the middle of the square. With another leap, Duke knocked Father Michael to the ground, preventing his escape. The neighbors now gathered around watched the scene in disbelief. No one could have imagined that Father Michael, a man who was supposed to symbolize goodness and faith, would find himself in such a humiliating and desperate situation. David approached the crowd, still catching his breath, and began to recount in detail everything he had discovered. People listened intently as he spoke about the secrets Hannah had uncovered. David explained that Hannah had found out Father Michael was embezzling the congregation's donations, using the money for something hidden. He also shared how the priest had orchestrated Hannah's kidnapping to stop her from speaking the truth. Some villagers, shocked by what they were hearing, helped hold Father Michael, while David determined to prove he was telling the truth, led them back to the church. There he held the small metal box firmly, feeling not only the weight of its contents but the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. In front of everyone, he opened the box, showing stacks of money organized and labeled with the names of the faithful who had donated. Shock spread among the people, who murmured to one another, surprised to see the proof of the priest's crime. Then David showed the key he had found and explained that it led to a secret storage room in the church itself. With the crowd following him, he led them to the storage room where Hannah, still weak, was chained. Seeing her there alive, a sigh of relief and surprise swept through everyone. Hannah, exhausted but relieved, could hardly believe she was safe. Duke, the loyal dog, ran to her, wagging his tail happily as if he knew his friend was now safe. The scene was touching, and everyone watched with emotion and relief, seeing Hannah back and knowing the truth had come to light exposed. Father Michael tried to justify himself, but no one wanted to hear his excuses. The community, once too devoted and trusting, now clearly saw who he really was. The priest's words no longer mattered, as everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes. David and Duke had uncovered the dark side of someone they'd never have suspected. With the priest finally detained in the community, aware of everything, the mystery was solved and justice was served. Hannah, moved, thanked David and Duke for risking everything to save her, and revealed the truth. Father Michael was taken away by the police, while the village, still in shock, began to rebuild itself on new foundations of transparency and trust. The residents, now aware of the dark secrets that had been hidden, united to transform the place into one of truth and honesty. David, who had risked so much to uncover the truth, decided to stay in the village. He chose to help Hannah recover and became part of the community, finding a new purpose there. David's friendship and courage touched everyone, and he became an essential part of the place. Duke, the loyal companion, was celebrated as a true local hero. Children gathered around him, adults petted him, and the entire village recognized the dog's role in bringing the truth to light. United by sacrifice and bravery, the villagers found a new beginning with a renewed spirit and a commitment to truth that would strengthen them in the future. Thank you so much for watching the video to the end. If you enjoyed the story and the bravery of Duke and David, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation is very important to us.